Hello everybody and welcome to this month's MediaWorks Masterclass. As people will know, my name is David Norris. I'm the Group Operations Director here at MediaWorks and I'll be hosting this session today. I'd like to introduce you to my colleagues. I've obviously got Paul and I've got Johnny with me, and today we'll be covering clicks and codes, navigating web development and user experience. So Johnny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Johnny. I'm the User Experience Director here at MediaWorks. My role primarily sits between our Data and Insights team, our Design UX team, and our Dev function to ultimately offer the best experience for our end users.
And Paul?
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Paul Davidson. I'm Technology and Experience Director, so I basically head up the web dev and the UX side of the business.
Cool. So I wanted to start with talking a bit about user experience and where it sits, because I think when we talk UX, I think some people often see it as a quite siloed activity, but actually one of the bigger challenges is actually about how user experience integrates with your wider business objectives. So do you want to talk us through how we deliver on those wider business objectives without compromising on things like performance?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an aspect of what user experience is and how it fits into that place, and you'll hear loads of different terms around what it is. User experience, customer experience, total experience is now kind of being brought into the mix a little bit more, and it does have to align with all key objectives. I mean, obviously you're talking about performance-based objectives there, but then there'll also be internal business objectives around creating efficiencies and things like that. And it's all aspects that we'll consider when we're looking at a project, or I think even anybody looking at any sort of project will be thinking, how do we ultimately offer the best experience, whether that's to our external users, and that's aligned to business goals, as in it might be selling something, it might be sign up for subscriptions alongside sort of tangible business objectives, but also the efficiencies that can be created internally as well. That might be through the CMS of a website. It might be offering the autonomy to internal marketing teams, whereby we're reducing that cost internally and making it easier for them to deliver on their day job as well. It all really falls under the user experience banner, but you'll just hear it called different things throughout.
Yeah, and I know when we've talked previously about user experience, it's heavily data driven, and I know we'll get into some of the qualitative versus quantitative methods that you can use and observational analysis, etc. But like generally, we do make a lot of data, don't we, in that space to think about creating the case and the narrative for why we would make any changes. Yeah,
definitely. I think if you, again, you put it back to align to business goals, every business decision will be based on data. Yep. So the experience around that business should also be based on data. Everything we'll look at will be aligned to how are people utilizing our platforms, where are they coming from, where are they leaving, how are we tracking them on that end-to-end journey, making sure that we understand as somebody comes into that fold and they make a purchase on the other side, what was that journey in between, how can we influence that, how can we make it better for them, ultimately to drive that end goal that might be revenue or something along those lines. But the data will lead all of those decisions in the middle.
Yeah. So when we talk web development and user experience, I guess where does one finish and where does the other sort of start? I think would be a question I would have, Paul, around because to me, user experience is almost that continuous improvement piece. It's about how we are driving sort of incremental performance, whereas I think sometimes web dev is seen as like a siloed one-off project where we're developing a new website, as an example.
Yeah, I think for me it's very much there's lots of touch points where US kind of comes in and out of dev projects. So the most important part of the project is the discovery phase, and UX plays a massive part in that in terms of all the user research and things. So, and then throughout the project, we're going through phases where we're kind of wireframing or doing information architecture, and then again it's going back to the UX guys, it's coming back into the dev guys from there, and then post-launch there's optimization and looking at CRO and things like that. So there's various touch points where US kind of crosses in and out of the dev process kind of on an ongoing basis, really.
Yeah, without having that development and UX team working in tandem, you're never going to get one solid aligned product. You're always going to end up with something that's either development focused on an efficiency here or something focused on the end user, they need to work together.
Yeah, and how do you foster that culture then, that collaborative culture when you're talking about sort of different elements? I agree, I appreciate that we'll all be driving towards ultimately one end goal, and that'd be, whether that be, as you say, performance, or whether that be, enhanced customer experience, or whatever the goal is for that particular website. But how do you foster that culture of cross-team working?
I think it's all about getting the teams set up at the start of the project to work in that kind of collaborative environment. So it's all about creating a culture of kind of no fear. So there's never a silly question. Everyone's got a valid input. And some of the most successful project teams I've worked on, you've always got at least one person from every kind of specialism within the agency involved from the start. So you've got people from strategy, dev, UX, UI, creative, and then you've got a PM who acts very much like the product owner and kind of drives the project forward. And then, of course, the most important people in the team are the clients. So getting the clients involved right at the start of the project and making them feel kind of really immersed in the project and feeling that they're part of that kind of integrated project team as well. When you work like that, you always get the best kind of value out of the project and the best output, really.
And is that what we would try and sort of engender as part of the discovery phase? Is that very much part of that process?
Definitely. I think when you think of any sort of project like that, it's a journey. Everybody needs to be taken on that journey. There's no point having people jump in at just various parts because nobody understands the context of what we're trying to achieve. And that's what we really talk about during the discovery phase, is making sure that everybody's bought in, everybody knows what that end objective is. Not everybody is kind of having to deal with that end objective or work on it. People do work on specialist parts of that journey, but I think if everyone has the understanding, everybody's pulling in one direction, you'll always find that everybody's egging each other on, trying to get the product further and better and offer that better experience. And I suppose even down to running the project, that's an experience. Like, it's still user experience, the client's experience in something, the team's experience in something. Like, it's just making sure we're all collaborative throughout.
Yeah, and I think like scale is something that I always think is really interesting in this area, and I think it's probably useful for people listening, watching, to understand sort of the scale of some of the web projects that we've worked on, because I think people think websites and they can, dependent on their own experiences, they might be thinking it's this big versus it actually being like much bigger. So sort of what are some of the smaller and larger projects that you've worked on over the last 12 months?
I think really it's anywhere from a kind of a really small kind of micro site or a bit of brochureware for an existing client where they kind of want to launch a separate product or service. There's several pages, anywhere from that scale up to a kind of huge enterprise level project for Southern Water, for example. We've just launched that recently. So, that was a 6 to 9 month project where there was a massive amount of kind of content production and input during the project as well. So, that's the kind of scale, really. Anywhere from a few weeks to potentially up to a year can be the kind of scale and difference between two projects.
Yeah, and all those projects, I guess, of different scales draw upon different skill sets, and that's why the project managers play such an important role in terms of coordinating and pulling all of that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's the most important thing is that the process is still the same. It doesn't matter if it's a huge project or a small project. You still have to involve the different kind of teams. So, and everybody, has those different touch points at different points of the project. But it's all about managing at the scale that you're working towards and getting the right people in the right project teams at the start.
Yeah. So I guess one of the key considerations now must be things like cybersecurity, to go in a slightly different direction, must be one of the biggest considerations out there when we're launching websites, when we're launching products and projects for clients. Sort of with everything that's going on in the cybersecurity space, how do we set ourselves up, and how do we ensure that we're like delivering best practice in the against cybersecurity or against cyber attacks, utilizing cybersecurity techniques?
I think it's all about just getting the basics right and kind of businesses or organizations having the kind of right security framework in place. So it all starts at kind of that internal IT level. So, having the right kind of software in place, like antivirus, etc., staff doing things like cybersecurity awareness courses, so they know how to deal with things like malicious emails. And then from a website level, it's again, the basics would be having a security certificate in place, a good hosting, secure hosting environment, having things like multi-authentication for secure areas, making sure you've got security patches and updates going on regularly. And then from a server level, there's been recent kind of DDoS attacks on gov sites and MOD sites. So it's really important to have a good hosting environment in place. We partner with a company called WP Engine, and they've got a really kind of robust systems in place to deal with kind of these kind of attacks on different levels. So it's really important to kind of invest in a good hosting environment as well.
Yeah, and it's something that's not going away. I think it's the real key in this space. It's only going to get more sophisticated, more aggressive. So I think this is why it's so important, isn't it, to map out all of that process as you start these, large build projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about having all these things in place so that you're mitigating as much risk as possible, I guess.
Yeah. Another big theme that comes through when I think we talk about web development, user experience now is AI. I feel like in every single masterclass I've been involved in the last probably 12 months, we've talked about AI, and it feels very much like a buzzword. And I appreciate that in something like paid search, AI's been in place for a long time. Google's been pushing machine learning, etc. But I guess, how is AI sort of reshaping the process of web creation and design? Because we do see various, particularly from a design perspective, you see, the Adobe suite often gets mentioned as the big thing where you can, in their advert where you can highlight and ring things out and you can just put in text and you can automate a lot of that. So how is it actually transforming what we do?
It massively affects everything that we're kind of doing throughout the whole process. I think if you take it from a discovery stage into design, into sort of web dev, and then even live on the front end of a website, but even within discovery, you're thinking about you having to analyze sort of large volumes of data, which to an extent used to be a bit of a manual task. And in terms of understanding that, you can now automate some of that and take some of that into consideration, so you can start to reduce some of that time, make sure we've got some efficiencies in the team. You can then start to look at, well, is the content right? You can then start to run content checkers, and even down to sort of quick content updates and quickly make changes throughout. It's all about the efficiencies early on that give you really good understanding. Once you're kind of into that sort of design phase, yes, there's elements of Photoshop that now allow you to speed up those processes. But when we're even doing usability testing, you can now run sort of like simulated usability testing. Right. So we can, yes, reach out to end users and get them to try and test our platforms. But let's do that when we've had that robust check. Now we can kind of simulate those early on to really understand, is it worthy of trying in front of real people? So we're not, wasting any time. We're creating efficiencies in the process and really understanding, is this platform fit for purpose, and is it going to have the effect that we want it to? Yeah. And then, yes, as you kind of get into the element of build, there'll be efficiencies created through AI throughout that process as well.
Yeah, I think for me, it's very similar to what I've seen in the other areas that we've talked about as part of these masterclasses, in the sense that it's not AI led, it's AI facilitated.
Yes.
So it's very much sort of person led process, human based processes, systems, etc., that we've built, that we structure, and we use AI to support that process. I think some of the worst examples I've seen in terms of things like SEO projects we've worked on, or PPC projects, is where people have almost tried to utilize all of the machine learning AI available that's out there and use that to produce all the content, wireframe their site, etc. And what you end up doing is there's no originality to it. Yep. So what you produce is something that's similar to something else. And the reality is then the likes of Google will just rank that very poorly, in the sense that you're offering nothing unique.
Yeah, the AI aspect, and it's something we always say in our team, is it's a really helpful apprentice. Yeah. It will help you learn and maybe create efficiencies and identify some areas, but it absolutely right now shouldn't be relied upon as it's a source of truth and we need to use that going forward. I think it'll just create those efficiencies to allow you to spend the time doing a bit more of that analysis, moving through the process a little bit quicker. And especially when we start thinking about testing, A/B testing, things like that. It allows us to get at content a little bit quicker.
Yep.
It allows us to look at the data a little bit quicker and the volumes. It allows us to get into testing a little bit quicker. So it means that we can start to learn and understand more about our end users faster and start to see some of those impacts quicker.
Yeah, it's simply a tool, isn't it?
Yes,
and I think it's
absolutely.
about how you learn to use that tool. Because I think it's about, I always say, it's like I've seen it used well in some areas and I've seen it used very poorly in some areas. And actually the difference is not the system, it's the human input that was actually, the request or the trigger that was put into it to actually, get you those results. So I think following on from that, I want to talk about sustainability. So I think sustainability, I know, is something that you and I, Paul, have discussed quite a lot in terms of tenders. Keeps coming up in tenders quite a lot of late around the idea of digital sustainability and what are we doing in terms of the footprint that we're leaving on the earth as a result of the actions that we're doing. So I just wondered sort of what are some of the key considerations that organisations should be thinking about as part of their web development and user experience activity?
Yeah, I think a good place to start would be something like energy efficient web hosting. So, using a green hosting provider. So their data centers are powered by renewable energy. So that really brings down the carbon footprint of kind of powering a website. And then in terms of how you actually, develop a website, you can really optimize it to help reduce the load on the server, which in turn, reduces the amount of energy being used. So things like reducing HTTP requests, really optimizing your code and optimizing all your assets like your images and your videos. So that does really help with all that kind of stuff. And then there's kind of minimalist design approach as well. So
yeah, definitely. It is a case of being responsible in the way that we design things as well. Now it's becoming sort of more and more apparent. We need to really start to think about the load that we're sort of creating. If you create a page that is just video heavy, image heavy, loads of content, all trying to load itself at the same time, that's when you're going to cause yourself a bit of an issue there. I think it's just being sensible around, it's that mix between what does the user need at that time and how can we create the best experience while also being sensible around what we put in that place at the right time.
So what are some of the things that you would do to practically do to I guess counterbalance or counteract the challenges that you've just identified? So
essentially the first thing that we'd really consider is the use of tools during that sort of experience. So say a user's coming onto a website and they're going to search for a specific item. We want to make sure that search might be available, but we're not loading in a video on how to use it. We're not loading in pictures around it. We're keeping the user very focused on what we want them to do as an action, but also not overwhelming them with loads of different things it's trying to load at the same time. So one, it's good from a user point of view, but two, it's also good from a sustainability point of view because we're not calling on that server to load 1,000 things at the same time, which will cause that issue. It's being quite sensible around the sort of things that we put in front of it. And then to an extent, there's a sort of lazy load approach, which is been around for a while, but it's definitely something we should do, is essentially load the thing you need at the time it's needed.
Right.
It works well from a Google's perspective as well.
Right, okay. I guess another emerging theme from a user experience perspective online has been the growth of things like social commerce. And I just wanted to touch on that with you, Johnny, really, around because I know we've talked about this quite a lot from how it fits in with the paid activity, for example, that my teams work on, in terms of the way that user journey's changed. It used to be very heavily dependent on sending consumers to a site or a third-party site that you were engaging with, or a large retailer where they might have had your product stocked. I think it's massively changed now, and I think even just scrolling through social media now, you see a lot more opportunity for social commerce, and you see that being very much driven in platform. So I guess where do we see that going, and what are some of the things that people need to consider when thinking about whether social commerce is right for them and the impact that could have on the user journey? Yeah,
I think going back to the first part, that when you talk about driving users through to a landing page to make a purchase, was always a conversation we used to have back in the day around how do we get the paid ads to perform better or this be, but it was all about the landing page. Now it is, how do we shorten that journey? How do we keep somebody in platform? Because there's an element of familiarity there. Like, people will use social platforms probably more so than they'll use most other platforms, especially through websites. So it's keeping them in a place that they're familiar with, because that is always going to make it much easier to get them to convert in the end space. In that space as well, it's going to be much easier to be influencer driven, because people are in a platform where, we'll use Instagram as the example, we're seeing a lot of influencer content in that space. People resonate well with that content. If they have the ability to move quickly through and make a purchase in platform on something they've seen just then, it is going to massively help drive that through. And I also think from a sort of loyalty and customer reviews aspect as well, if you're in a platform where you're seeing that loads of people have maybe liked a product, loads of people are engaging with a product, you can read comments that people are liking a product or engaging with the product, have previously purchased it.
Yeah.
It's basically doing all the hard work that the website would have to do once somebody moves through to that point anyway.
Yeah.
If you're moving through somebody to a website, you're not necessarily starting that journey again, but you've got to build trust very fast.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're keeping them within that social platform, they already have that level of trust because they must follow you or something along those lines anyway.
Yeah, and I think there's two things I think that have changed as well in this area. I think from an e-commerce perspective, like the payment processes are massively more sophisticated. So now if you click on, from a social commerce perspective, it's all PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, it's Klarna in some instances. It's, you have a multitude, and that I think gives like consumers a lot more confidence about, right, okay, I'm pretty safe with these brands. Yeah. Whereas I think previously the idea would be you might have a bit of a hesitation around, is this website legit? Am I giving them this information? And I think like the way that it's much more integrated now means that you can purchase very, very quickly as well in the platforms from an e-commerce perspective. Yeah,
definitely. And I think when you're thinking about that journey on site as well, we're driving somebody through to a website, we're then getting them to basically pick the product again that they've already seen that they've liked. We're then putting them into a basket. We'll then send them through a checkout purchase journey, when if we're doing it through a social platform, we're keeping them probably within 2 steps.
Yeah.
When you're putting them through a website, you're probably thinking about 5 different steps, which is essentially 5 opportunities to drop out of that purchase journey.
Yeah.
Not saying that that's a bad thing, because obviously you want to build brand awareness, you want to make people know that you've got the platform that sits behind it, build trust, but also that shortening that journey down is always going to be a strong option.
Yeah, and then on the B2B or lead gen side, I think it's get away from social commerce, but it's quite similar, isn't it? In the sense that now we're seeing much more in-platform sort of lead forms, where you can have inquiry forms in platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., where people can fill out all of their details and ahead of getting to the website. And again, that's changed the journey from a lead gen perspective, hasn't it? Or a B2B or a
Yeah, definitely. LinkedIn is the example in there. We're seeing you're clicking and open up forms within platform, driving efficiencies through there. And I think as long as we have that synergy between messaging and making sure that we're driving a consistent sort of brand tone and making sure that people understand exactly the notion that they're going through, again, it just shortens that journey right down. You're not driving somebody through to a platform to then try and serve them up a form in which you're offering opportunities to drop out. You've got to work even harder, arguably, from a sort of B2B point of view, because you're asking for a lot of information for sometimes not what's known in return. Like, I think when you're doing that in LinkedIn, somebody has that reactive sense of, okay, I'll inquire and the form's there instantly. It can definitely shorten that journey, just build up a little bit of trust. And I think the more and more people get used to completing those forms in the likes of LinkedIn or sort of any platform that offers that, it'll become more and more necessity to just review as part of our sort of optimization process.
Yeah, and I think because you're doing it all in platform, it can, in terms of help, in terms of retargeting, remarketing from a personalization perspective as well, in terms of how do you fill those buckets, how do you fill those that data so that you can actually tailor a message towards somebody, and it speeds up the time in terms of not just having they've clicked on website, the abandoned, so let's do a cart abandonment and remarket those individuals. You can do it much further up the funnel now, and I think that for me creates a huge opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. You're engaging with people much earlier in that funnel. You're understanding the the type of things that they're engaging with, and that'll work both from a B2B and a B2C point of view. You can start to see how they're engaging with products or sort of services, understanding exactly what they're after, and it will just basically open a market up there. People can start to get more competitive earlier in that journey, looking for that audience's attention. But all of that will be personalized to exactly what you're looking for if you're looking for a specific product or service.
Yeah. So I guess broadening it out a little, Paul, in terms of the future of user experience and where we're heading, I think, like, what do you see as some of the next big innovations that marketers and people watching, listening need to start to consider? Because this is one of those areas, I think, where you often don't see sort of revolutionary changes. You sort of see evolution and but consistent evolution over a period of time, and it's about that incremental change. So, but what are the big things that people should be considering or have on their agenda when considering user experience?
I think quite a big one for me is accessibility, and yes, it is, as you say, it's an ever-evolving thing, but I think it's more around that businesses adopting that approach of like designing for everyone, design for all. So I think we kind of take for granted a lot of technology that we use every day that's actually been designed with accessibility in mind. So a good example is text messages. So, you know, that was designed for people with hearing impairments so that they could use mobile phones to communicate. But now, you know, billions of people send billions of messages every day, and it's now become something that everybody uses every day. So it's a really good example of when you kind of design for all, you can end up with a really good, simple solution that everybody wants to use. So I think people getting into that kind of mindset and adopting that kind of approach is quite a big one going forward.
Yeah, definitely agree on the accessibility standpoint. I think a lot of the conversations we have internally when we're looking at design anything or moving forward with any sort of project is around the awareness of accessibility. I think the stat is 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability. You've got to consider, so 1/5 of the UK market who could be trying to use your product, use your service, engage with you, may need something extra in order to allow them to do that. So there's such a huge opportunity there to make your service, your platform inclusive, and it has to be done from the outset. It has to be a sort of mentality that goes into it to make sure that it's followed through with. It can't be an afterthought.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things I just wanted to touch on was personalization. I know it sort of touched on it, but I think just consumers are expecting more, aren't they? You know, now I think about it, everybody wants that tailored, I guess, experience based on what their likes, preferences are, etc. Yeah. So what are our thoughts around the future of personalization from a UX perspective?
I think it'll be huge. It's already kind of here. We're engaging with a lot of the clients that we speak to around how do we personalize that experience anyway, understanding, you know, where somebody comes into the site, what kind of content do we feed up? Have they been here before? Do we feed them something slightly different than what they've seen previously? It's slowly becoming what people expect more and more of. And to be honest, I think in the future, it's going to get down to the level of personalization where people are expecting the platform to do the work for them. Yeah. In a sense, I think to give an example, we spoke about it around sort of like, even in the fashion industry, people will come to that. They'll be asking a website to find an item of clothing that matches these pants that I've already purchased. Not looking for myself, but I'm expecting that to pair up something that I need to help serve me. And I think that's probably where the future of it's going to go. There's going to be a heavy reliance on the platform to do the work. And I think there already is, to an extent. You're seeing a lot of sort of use of it within chatbots and things like that at the minute. A chatbot that you can ask a question that will scan your whole website and feed back the information that you need. Yeah. In that sense, it's no longer just a chatbot that spits back the same answer every time you get it. It feels now more conversational. Yeah. And that's what people are coming to expect from websites and apps.
Yeah, and I think that the sophistication of people online as well has massively increased, isn't it? You know, I see people, you know, we talk about things like voice search, we start to talk about image search. I think like all of that is arising and growing because that's almost becoming the expectation.
Yeah.
You know, I see it, you know, you talked about SMS, but like the amount of people who leave voice notes, you know, as opposed to now typing out messages is incredible. Like, you know, I family round at the weekend and I have, you know, nieces, teenage nieces, and they're not thinking about, they're not text first. They are very much audio first. They're expecting that sort of refinement and interaction, and like that is clearly going to be a trend as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to the voice search element as well, it becomes more accessible because you're opening up another channel to allow somebody to kind of engage with it, but also on the level of more conversational as well. I can now search for something that I'm not 100% sure what I'm looking for, but I can probably wrap something around it if I'm explaining it. And I think that's the direction things will start to go. We've had kind of a lot of chats internally around the sort of voice search thing. Obviously, people get more and more used to it because they'll have Alexas or sort of Google products in the house that make things a lot more conversational, but people are going to start to expect that in apps, on websites, when they're searching for things. It's always just going to end up part of the journey. Yeah.
I know we've touched on this, but what do you think, Johnny, in terms of then are the big consumer behaviour changes that are going to influence things like web design and user experience? Because this is all primarily around satisfying a user at the end of the day. You know, what we're trying to do is, and whether that satisfying the user, as I say, is a membership portal, whether it be informational based brochureware site, whether it be a, you know, fulfilling you know, a retail sort of commercial based transaction online. Like there's always a user at the end of that. They're always the person who's wanting a response or wanting the interaction. So what do we think are going to be the big changes that we're going to see from a consumer perspective that's going to change approaches, behaviors, etc. in the UX web design space?
I think the level of personalization we've touched on, I think will massively be a bit of a driver. I think sort of speed to end process will massively help. I think we're also starting to see people wanting more conversational answers. They're wanting to, we're seeing a little bit of a shift in people wanting to speak to somebody at the end of a sort of interaction and engagement, which kind of goes back on kind of where everybody's shifted over time, because everybody wanted to go into this sort of self-serve notion. So we're kind of starting to see some patterns emerge through elements of that. But I think in my opinion, it's every sort of client, every sort of business is going to be different in that sense. It's different how you would want to serve somebody through, whether it's a product-led approach, whether it's a subscription-led approach, whether it's into service-led approach. I think it's a case of just making sure you understand your audience and kind of what they want and listen to them. I think consumers are going to more and more want to be heard in that space, and I think it's just making sure that the journey is meeting their expectation.
Yeah, I think that's the role, isn't it, within MediaWorks, where we have things like strategic planners and data and insights, is trying to get ahead of a lot of this in terms of what are the trends that we're seeing, like, you know, before they become a mainstay, and then how can we adapt our activity and strategies to fulfill that need before it becomes a deterrent. How can you actually get first mover advantage for it actually to become a plus or an actual positive of engagement in terms of the experience? I think, you know, that is quite an interesting piece. I know we touched on it and we talked about voice and the way that that's changing, image-based searching, the way that search engines, I mentioned this previously, but Google's infamous statistic is that 15% of searches every single year are searches that are unique and not seen before. So again, we're seeing people make requests into the platforms that are not, you know, are getting more and more sophisticated, and they're expecting more. So how do we manage that from a user experience perspective?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking of that, an end user doesn't always know what they want out of it anyway. I think what's the old saying, is it that if Henry Ford had asked people what they want, they would have said faster horses. It's not a car. It's really starting to understand, like, how do we get ahead of that? Like, how do we make sure that we're offering an end user what they need before they know what they want in that aspect? Because at that point, you're kind of already behind the trend. I think a lot of it is sort of data-driven decisions. It's having that analysis of how are people engaging with the platforms? What are they searching? Just constantly reviewing that data and making sure that we're on top of it. Like you say, people are searching for very different things to what necessarily as a business you may call something. I think it's all about being sensible and making sure that we're kind of optimizing ourselves and making ourselves more visible, making sure that we've got some of that information exactly where people want it, and just making sure that we can work in a way that's like iterative changes and making sure that we're moving forward. I think the best way of working is never to kind of have those big bang changes if it can be helped. There's always a need for it, and don't get us wrong, it does have to happen, but I think the iterative change, just making sure that we're moving with the technologies that people start to familiarize themselves with, but also sort of delivering on those technologies as well, and making sure that people, when they engage with our platform, it's kind of familiar to something else that they've been using and they get to understand. I think the last thing a user wants is to come to the website and be given something they've never seen before. Because all you're doing then is adding to a level of confusion. And I think that for me, it's that iterative change, just making sure we're always evolving with the users and users' needs.
So we've talked about the customer perspective. We've also got like the commercial objectives of the organization. And I think what we've talked about there is agility in a way to match what the consumer trends we're seeing in the consumer space. But we've also got to think about agility from commercial changes and commercial objectives moving. So how do we sort of create an environment or plan towards, making, our web development user experiences agile in terms of meeting ever-changing client needs or changes in process systems, everything else that's going on?
I think businesses need to get in this kind of mindset where, like, that content management systems involved, is that it needs to be very much a hub for content that they're going to have long term. So using something like a headless solution means that their content just kind of sits within this platform, but you've got your website, you've got an application, maybe a mobile app, and if you need to adapt and change, maybe you're going to rebrand, or you get merged in or bought out by another company and you need to adapt quickly, you're kind of changing the front end of the website every 2 or 3 years. You don't have to make these massive wholesale changes and completely re-platform again. So things like that can really help to get into that kind of mindset.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's making sure that you're creating efficiencies in that process as well. Like you say, business goals change all of the time. Like we work with a lot of businesses from a CRO perspective, and working with them on objectives, you'll see even throughout a year that'll differ based on seasonality, it'll differ based on traffic levels, it'll differ based on the amount of leads they've had for a specific service that month or that quarter versus another month. It's all about having that ability to just be agile in the approach, like constantly reviewing that data, making sure that everything is, to be fair, led by that data. What is that data telling us? What's the trend that's coming? Can we start to see where that trend's going to change coming up, so we're well informed of the decisions that we make, and just making sure we have that agile approach as a project team, because what we really want to do is make sure that everybody's aware of the goal, everybody's kind of brought into those regular meetings, regular updates, to make sure that everybody knows if and when we do have to pivot, people fully understand the reason behind it, because there's nothing worse than a pivot happening and not everybody understanding that, because then nobody's really aligned on that. It's just about having that consistency and approach, the agile approach, and making sure everybody is aligned to one sort of key outcome.
Yeah. I think as a final point, we always try and finish with sort of practical input, and I think we've covered a lot of practical guidance for people as we've gone through today. But one for me is the idea of A/B testing. Always crops up. It's one of the things that we have so many conversations. One of the reasons we speak more at work, to be honest, is around A/B testing. How does that link with, like, in whether it's in platform, whether it's actually on a mobile application, whether it be on a website itself. I guess sort of, what are the benefits to people out there who might go, well, what is A/B testing? Like, they might turn around and go, well, we've got a website and our website performs or it doesn't perform. Like, I guess, would you talk people through A/B testing strategy, why it's important, and what people should start to think about if they're quite new to this area?
Yeah, definitely. So the idea of A/B testing is that we run an unbiased test. We essentially mask an element of a website, an app, or something like that with maybe another visual, maybe some different content, maybe a slightly different approach or structure, and essentially split the audience maybe 50-50 between the two different versions. It gives us an unbiased approach in terms of what performs better, and it allows us to kind of move forward with a change in our strategy based on how people have responded in that instance. They'll do that through the platform without the user ever really knowing they've been served something different to other people. And it just means that we're getting that really strong insight in terms of the decisions that we're making. There's a few advantages to doing that. We are, again, led by the data. We're getting a good understanding of how people are responding to certain pieces. We can run much smaller tests and quickly iterate on that to make sure that, you know, we can test multiple call to actions, multiple pieces of content. We can test them very fast to get an understanding of how people engage with them quickly, but doing it without necessarily that development cost at the end of that as well. You know, the last thing you want to do is implement something where you've paid that upfront development cost and find out it wasn't the right decision. And you kind of maybe having to revert back or change. This creates that insight, so we know that when we do create that development piece or do implement it full time into the web platform or application, it's worth it. It's worth its time and effort. It's worth that return on investment, because you're getting that good, strong understanding that that change is needed, but also you're understanding how that can affect other elements of your marketing as well. A/B tests are fantastic in platform in websites and apps, but can also be run through your paid campaigns in terms of ad creatives, whether that's statics, whether it's videos, whether it's a change in messaging. It can be run all the way through to the emails you send out to customers at the end of that journey. If someone's made a purchase, how do you follow up on it? How do you build loyalty? What are the types of emails, the content that you send there to kind of get people back into that funnel again and keep them engaged with your brand? Like, it's not just an element of website. It happens throughout the whole purchase experience. And all of it will explain and help understand that user experience even more so.
Because I think for me, the key in this area is like a systematized process. You know, where you don't see it as a one-off thing, and you don't just test one particular element. Like you say, this can be anything from very much top of the funnel, like what creates the best attention versus what's the best checkout button, you know, that drives a better conversion rate at that point. And I think the thing I'd say is, I think some of the most impressive tests I've seen in the last 4+ years at MediaWorks is around some of those changes that we've made from a user experience perspective, because you can flood a website with plenty of traffic, but actually, or you can flood an experience, if you like, with plenty of traffic, but it's actually, how do you just pull those or turn those dials in every little micro moment that actually go in your favor versus one that's not optimized? I think the results are incredible that you can see in that space.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you put it into context of another element, Formula One, they're always iterating and evolving their cars. They don't do it by changing the whole car. They do it by changing elements and winning that 1% each time. And that's all you're doing through a digital platform or experience. You're essentially making changes to drive a better performance through a paid aspect, maybe a better performance through an SEO aspect. You're ultimately given a better on-site experience in the hope that we can drive more conversions at the other end. You're potentially changing call to actions on-site that drives somebody through to make a purchase, but also could you then take that call to action and use it further up the funnel through social channels? So really you're taking a lot of learnings that you don't quite get when you make that just do it change, when you just kind of go in and right, I'll change call to actions to that. You don't quite understand. That's more of a before and after the change has happened. You can look at the data, but it doesn't give you that unbiased approach of what was it versus that original state that you get through A/B testing.
And I think the key really is mapping out that whole customer journey. Because as I say, I think too many people just think of it as a bottom of the funnel activity around, right, we've got these people at the point of conversion, how do we make them convert better? But actually, if you broaden out and say, right, what are the various user journeys that we've actually got, and how does that all fit together, and how can you make, as you say, those 1% throughout the journey, not just at the bottom in the conversion piece, if you like, then you're potentially onto something quite significant for your organization.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you are looking for quick wins, absolutely at that basket phase is probably where you'll find them.
Yeah.
But it's all about that long-term learning. It's all about that iterative change, and doing it throughout the funnel will always make your performance marketing work harder by you're driving people through, you're getting them through the funnel. But then it's so important to even consider on that end piece, it's building loyalty with people. It's building that on that experience of what do people want to hear from the brand once I've made that purchase? How do we re-engage them with the brand? And again, once they come back into that funnel, that's a different experience again. So we need to then consider those people and how we differ that experience, and create those iterative changes for those people to move through that funnel again. Yeah, it's such an important, it plays such an important part throughout the whole experience that I don't think you can't understate how important testing is as part of that.
So in a similar vein, final question on this is so if you're a marketing manager, chief marketing officer, chief commercial officer of a business, and you're sat thinking, oh, I've not set any budget aside for this year, and I might be able to find some small pots of budget to actually engage with some of the things that we've talked about. I guess, where would you start? Like, what would your advice be to those marketers who are looking to maximize their return on investment, if you like, but might not have the largest of budgets? What are the key things that people should be thinking about doing?
From my point of view, there's a couple of ways. It's probably test big. I think we spoke there about changing call to actions, or maybe making small iterative changes. If you're maybe on a more limited budget, maybe it's more impactful stuff. Maybe it's taking a form from the bottom, putting it in the header. It's a fairly impactful change because it's right there in front of somebody. Maybe it's hiding a navigation once somebody's through to the first point of purchase, because again, it's going to reduce people getting distracted and dropping out. There's bigger changes that can be made, which means that we're kind of maximizing that budget a little bit better from a testing point of view. And also just sort of making sure that we understand the data as well as we're kind of moving through that. We want to make sure that we are reading deeper into that data. I mean, the majority of businesses out there will have a vast amount of data that they've maybe never even considered running through and looking at. And that data will tell you exactly where people are struggling on your platforms. It'll tell you where they're having a good experience, a bad experience. There's the opportunity to put surveys on your site, polls on your site, which, to be fair, you can probably do for free through a lot of platforms. Which gives you first party feedback, and people actually tell you what they think of the experience. There's a lot of you can do on sort of minimal budget. And then the other side of it is just focusing your efforts in the right place as well. We want to make sure that, if you're running a paid campaign, driving people through to specific landing pages, you're going to optimize there first. You're going to really start to make sure you drive more efficiencies through your sort of paid campaign, rather than going over here trying to optimize a whole website. Let's do it through that campaign, make sure we're getting the best return on investment there. And then we can start to begin our view of everything else that sits in there as well.
I think to add to that, Paul, I think a question sort of follow on from that for me would be around just making sure that when you are setting out on the journey and you have got those sort of, you're building a budget for a web development project, that you actually think about the ongoing piece of a web development project.
Yeah, I think we see it quite often where, a potential new client comes to us and they've had a site designed and built maybe 12 months ago, and it's not performing very well. And, we'll take a look at it and analyze the data, and we'll suggest that, we need to do a bit of an audit, and then we need to start to maybe go through a process of doing some CRO work to improve conversion rates, etc. And then they say, oh no, I've got to go back to my boss and ask for more money. He's going to kill us. I've just spent all this money on the design and build, and there's no budget left. So I think it's really key that businesses do understand that our website is never in a state of finished, and the launch is kind of just the start, really. And you need to set aside that budget, even if it is, a relatively small amount, for that monthly kind of optimization over time. As Johnny says, it's a iterative process over a long period of time, and any kind of little changes that you can do, analysing the data month on month and making little improvements can, add up over time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you wouldn't buy a car and never service it, I suppose, is an analogy to think about. You always want to make sure the website's working harder for you, moving in the right direction as new technology emerges. Are you keeping up to date with that? You don't want a website that people don't enjoy using, or an app or a platform don't enjoy using. You want to make sure that you're giving people the best experience, because the majority of those people will either purchase or not purchase with you, or inquire with you or not inquire with you, based on the experience that they have while on those platforms. So for me, it's crucial that you kind of build that into the idea and the budget of the website launch is kind of first phase.
Yeah.
Then what's next? How do we offer a better alternative or a better experience going down the line? And it's not to say that that has to happen immediately, but it should always just be a consideration when you're kind of moving through that experience.
Right, well, I think that's a good point to finish it. So I'd just like to say thanks very much for your input. I think that's been really interesting, really insightful, with lots of practical things that people listening, watching can take away. So much appreciated, Paul, much appreciated, Johnny. And thanks to everybody who has listened or watched the session today. It's part of the series that we're doing, with much content coming out throughout June around things like web development, user experience, lots of content across our social networks, on our website, etc. And I'll be back next month to start talking about paid search and what that looks like, and the future of paid search and how all that fits together. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in future sessions. Thank you.